They say the first sound you remember in a new home is the one that tells you who's really in charge. In my case, it was the pounding on my front door so hard the windows shook and my coffee rippled like a tiny earthquake. Sunrise spilling gold across Silver Birch Lake, while an army of strangers in matching navy polos marched up my steps as if they owned the place. Which, funny enough, is where the story gets complicated fast. I cracked the door and there she was, tall, razor cheekbones, lipstick like a warning flare, clutching a clipboard, the way a cop holds a badge, flanked by people with notebooks and smug little smiles. They didn't introduce themselves, didn't ask, just flowed into my living room like a tide you can't stop. And when I said, "Can I help you?" the woman smiled in that way people smile when they've already decided who you are and what you're worth. "Marla Kane, president of the Lakeshore Commons Association," she announced, as if that magic phrase could turn my deed into confetti. "You're trespassing," I said, not because I love drama, but because facts matter, and because it is extremely weird to have strangers inventorying your furniture before you've finished your first cup of coffee. She laughed, turned to her group. "You hear that, folks? She thinks she owns it," and they chuckled like a studio audience. One guy in a hat adding, "Sweetheart, the lake and the surrounding lots fall under our control. We decide who stays and who goes." And if you've ever felt your blood go from chilly to boiling in a heartbeat, you know the exact temperature of my voice when I told them to get out. They left a bright red notice taped to my door. "Trespass warning, vacate misspellings," and all which would have been funny if it wasn't taped to my brand new cabin, and across the road a row of neighbors watched, like folks at a parade that might turn into a car crash. No one waving, a couple shaking their heads. And right then I realized I wasn't walking into a homeowners association. I was walking into a cult control dressed up as community rules. Bent into weapons, fear sold as standards. You know what I mean? That night I killed the lights and stood behind the blinds, steam curling off my mug. Heartbeat settling into the soft slap of water on the shore when I saw them again. Flashlights, measuring tapes. The navy polos like moths. One of the men shook a can and drew a giant red X across my front wall, the hiss of paint hanging in the cold air. I stepped out. "What do you think you're doing?" Marla's smile was back, cool and cruel, just marking what's soon to be ours, and I swear my hands went from open to fists without consulting me first. Let me back up a sec. Because this is where I could have ended the whole thing, where I could have pulled the single sheet of paper that turns a bully into a ghost. The quiet purchase I'd made through a land trust months earlier, when this place was just a rumor and a line item. The maps with my name tucked where it counts. The kind of paperwork no one in a polo ever wants to see: the land, the roads, the shorelines, but I didn't flash it, not yet, because sometimes the smartest thing you can do is let people show you who they are on camera. The following morning, the engine started, 3 white trucks blocking my driveway like a roadblock. Logos slapped on the doors like cosplay men, unloading ladders and caution tape as if they were FEMA, and I was a flood. One of them drilling a HOA property. No trespassing sign into my porch rail, while I stood there in a robe, saying calmly as I could, "This is my property. Get off my land." And Marla, God bless her, tilted her head and said, "Outsiders don't last long here," which is a sentence you only hear from people who are terrified. Something is about to change. They taped off the lake like a crime scene, unhooked my little fishing boat and shoved it into the middle water, clapping when it drifted out of reach, a petty, stupid move, but effective. Because it wasn't about the boat, it was about seeing if I'd break that afternoon. An older man wandered up, sun-leathered baseball cap, pulled low, the kind smile people get after they've watched enough storms roll through. "Name's Earl," he said, voice just above a whisper. "Be careful, Marla. Runs folks out." Most people stopped pushing back a long time ago, and when I asked why he was telling me, he shrugged. "Because I hate bullies," which turned out to be the beginning of everything. That night I caught them at my shed with bolt cutters. One of the men flashed a knife, moonlight on steel, and instinct kicked in, light in his eyes. Door locks slammed their fists on the wood threats through the panels. I didn't sleep. Sat on the floor with a baseball bat across my knees. Sunrise creeping over the lake like nothing had happened. A smear of red under the X that said leave, or else, which is frankly not the best copywriting, but the message landed, and then it escalated, because bullies always escalate when you don't fold. They came with chains and a rented dozer for my dock floodlights on the trucks, neighbors peeking from curtains, my phone rolling Earl, stepping in front of me and telling them to back off. "We warned you," Marla called over the diesel growl. "Your dock violates our regulations, and if your stomach has ever dropped at the sound of splintering wood, you know the way it feels to watch a blade shear through something you love, to hear the ugly cheer from people who think destruction proves they're in charge. Call whoever you want," she smirked. "By the time anyone gets here, it'll be gone." And when the dock finally collapsed in a thunder of nails and water, I told Earl quiet, "I'm not fighting them now. I'm letting them destroy themselves." That afternoon I drove to town, spread deeds and plats across my lawyer's desk, and we checked every line twice airtight. The trust, the titles, the riparian rights that made their "we run things here" line sound like a middle school skit. I could have filed the quake right then. But patience is a sharper blade. That night 2 men rolled black barrels to the shore, hazard symbols, scraped and dirty, whispering about teaching her a lesson. And when I stepped out of the dark with my camera up and said EPA, the word hit them like a slap. They hauled the barrels back, cursing tires, spitting gravel. The sheriff watched my footage the next morning and said the words, "An exhausted lawman says when politics and fear gum up the works. We'll investigate," which is not the same as "we'll fix it," so I planned as if I was on my own. Letters followed fines and cartoon numbers, county complaints with my name spelled 3 different ways, spray paint on my porch, a dead raccoon with a note. Yeah, that happened, and I still waited because the only thing stronger than fear is evidence. And in a place like this, you don't get change by trading insults. You get it by letting truth pile up until it's too heavy to ignore. When 3 men started burying plastic bags of lawn chemicals by the waterline, I charged, bat in my hands. Neighbors' lights popping on, one by one, the men scattering and leaving their shovels like breadcrumbs for the sheriff to photograph. "They'll wriggle," Earl warned, "but they're cornered now." Marla called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. The faithful packed shoulder to shoulder, and I walked in late, folder in my hand heart. Weirdly calm, because that's the thing about bullies. Once the room stops laughing at their jokes, the magic drains out. "This woman is a trespasser," Marla declared from the front, and the murmurs rolled like wind through grass, and I stepped forward and did the least dramatic thing in the world. I read the law, I showed the filings, I laid out the parcels and roads and shore fronts, and I explained very clearly that the trust they'd never heard of had bought what they'd always pretended to own. You could feel the oxygen leave the room, some folks angry, some embarrassed, a handful relieved. Marla laughed, called the documents fake, then glanced down, and the laugh died in her throat because even tyrants can read a seal. If the story ended there, it would be tidy, a gavel, an apology, a community potluck. But real life doesn't roll credits. It lowers the sky and strikes a match. That night, flames raced along the far shore, dock to dock, neighbors screaming as they dragged hoses, smoke turning the lake into a black mirror. Marla stood at the edge with that tiny, satisfied smile people wear when they think the rest of us are props in their movie. The fire crews knocked it down. Nobody died, thank God. But something fundamental burned up with those planks. The patience I'd been saving, the restraint. I filed my notices the next morning, every doorstep clear as day. Stay in lease from the actual owner, or move out. Not revenge, not punishment, just reality with a stamp on it. By then, the spell was cracking. A contractor refused to drive a loader through my cabin in front of 50 phones, tossed the keys, and said he wasn't going to prison for anyone. Deputies cuffed 2 of Marla's safety committee guys for the gasoline attack we'd filmed, and still, she strutted up my walk out on bail, eyes fever bright, whispering, If I can't have it, nobody will, which is a line that belongs in a movie and in an indictment. The next dawn, a black drum leaked, slick poison across the water, fish floating belly up, neighbors sobbing the lake, wearing a rainbow sheen that felt like grief. Sirens taped the EPA on the way, deputies walking straight to Marla's dock. Marla Kane, the lead, called, "You're under arrest," and for the first time her shoulders sagged. You'd think that would be the last page. It wasn't a judge signed papers. She made bail again. Darkness pooled at the edge of town, and at 3 in the morning, the glow rose over the pines, her house, roaring wind, pushing the fire straight for my porch, neighbors running kids, crying, sparks landing in my hair, Earl dragging a hose while I grabbed folders and hard drives, and the single envelope that had started it all. Marla stood in her yard like a queen on a burning deck, laughing until the smoke turned the laugh to a cough, flames curling around her ankles. And I swear to you, I didn't think I just ran. "Are you crazy?" Earl shouted, and maybe I was. But there's a line you don't cross, and leaving someone to burn alive is on the far side of it. I pulled her by the arm. She fought me for 1 second, then collapsed, and we staggered out together as a beam slammed down where she'd been standing. By mid-morning, her place was a black skeleton, and my porch was a charcoal sketch. But the cabin stood, she sat under a blanket, small and shaking, mascara slicked down her face, and when I knelt and asked, "Was it worth it?" she whispered. Not to me, but to some broken version of herself. I just wanted control, and I believed her in the saddest way. Because tyrants don't start with power, they start with fear. The deputies took her without a fight. Arson and attempted murder stacked on top of everything else. And for the first time, the neighborhood exhaled. Time does what time does. The EPA set booms and scrubbers, the county crews rebuilt the far shore. Neighbors who'd glared began to nod. A few knocked on my door with pie plates and apologies. A messy human reconciliation in a place where nobody's hands were perfectly clean. The lease offers went out again, fair numbers, simple terms, and most folks stayed because once the spell breaks, you remember why you moved to water in the first place, to breathe, to watch ospreys hunt, to drink coffee while the lake turns to glass. Months later, I stood on a new porch, wider boards, fewer nails lessons literally baked into the lumber sunrise, doing that soft pink thing across the cove, Earl walking up with 2 mugs, and that same tired ball cap. "You did it," he said. But I shook my head. Because the truth is more complicated. I didn't win. Not really, we just turned the lights back on and made the rules real again. And that's not victory so much as maintenance. The daily work of refusing to let fear run the place. I set my phone on the rail, hit record, and spoke to the people who've been watching this mess from living rooms and break rooms and the front seats of trucks. Wherever you're hearing this, remember, bullies don't fall because they get bored. They fall because ordinary folks decide enough is enough, because cameras roll, because paper trails beat power trips, because neighbors pull hoses in the dark when fire is coming, and someone still runs into the smoke for someone they can't stand. You know what I mean? Don't shout if you can document. Don't swing if you can file. And when you've got no choice left, stand up straight and say your name out loud. I ended the recording. Let the silence settle. Watched a ripple slide across the water where the fish were finally back in the distance. A heron lifted like a gray prayer, and for one absurdly cinematic moment I could almost hear the credits music swell. But life isn't a movie, it's a lake. You keep cleaning a porch, you keep replacing a community, you keep choosing, even when it's hard, especially then. And the question that lingers isn't whether Marla was a villain or I was a hero. It's what any of us would do the moment someone in a crisp polo tells us to hand over our dignity in exchange for belonging. Yeah, that happened here, but it doesn't have to happen again. So tell me, what does justice look like in a place like this where rules get twisted and community is used like a crowbar, where ownership and responsibility crash into each other on the same shoreline? Should a landlord who saves the lake get to set the terms? Should a neighborhood that stayed silent get a clean slate? Should a tyrant who finally breaks get a chance to rebuild somewhere else? Drop your thoughts below, argue it out, keep it respectful. And if this story hits a nerve because you've got your own version brewing, share it. Sunlight only does its job when we open the blinds.